And we are live.
Good morning, everybody, or good evening, or good day.
Or good day, eh? It
Good day,
is,
eh?
you know what time it is?
It's
Time
keeping
for KTLO.
Keeping the learning on.
Wow.
keeping the learning on.
This is episode 15 and it's gotten worse.
It's gotten worse. I apologize. It's all me.
No, it's not, Greg. you just want it to be you.
Roy tries so hard to cue us.
I know.
It's like a whole classroom full of kids who don't want to listen. We're throwing.
Yeah.
I know. And people watching the recording don't know that, behind the scenes, Roy is the guy in the booth. All right, going live in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then this.
No, it's Greg. See, it's 5, 4.
Yeah.
See, yeah, it's the silence that
kills.
And speaking of silence, let's talk about, what are we going to talk about? It's episode 50. Don't just check that box is what we're talking about today. What does that even mean? We're going to explore that, aren't we? We are.
It's a good topic, and I'll tell you, I'm going to warn you, it's a depthy topic. It's not just.
I was waiting for you to use that word.
Something depthy.
It's so deep of you.
Yes.
I do not think it means what you think it means.
Not even remotely.
Yes, not even remotely. So who are we and what are we doing? Here we are.
There you go.
There's just a little bit about us and who we are.
That was me last week.
That was you last week. You were on the road.
You're on the road. Hey,
south of France. It was great.
Did you get to where you were going? For our listeners, did you?
I did indeed.
And what did Mar say when you got there? Oh.
But I'm bummed.
They got scared and ran away.
Wow. Yeah.
All right.
So here we are. We're going to talk about checking the box. Don't just check that box. What does that even mean is the big question. And so the title for this episode sprang from something Greg said. So we're going to blame Greg, basically, is what we're going to do. But that's our default anyway.
So a lot of us are involved with the, actually all of us, to one degree or another, have our roots in the IT. So the CIO role is considered, the greatest of accomplishments, if you will, within IT realms, if you aspire to be a manager or a leader. And I spent 3 years as a CIO in the organization that I served. And we talked about that. If you're on a career path, if you're planning out what's in it for me, then CIO is a check the box activity, man. I did the CIO thing, or I did the, whatever it is. If you expand that topic out just a little bit, is the idea that we do some things in life to check the box, to tick the box, to say, I've done that. I've covered that space. And when we start talking, digging into this just a little bit further, there's a downside of ticking the box. So if you say, what is the average lifespan of a CIO, lifespan meaning time that you're in a position, depending on who you talk to, is anywhere from 2.5 to 3-4 years. And I was a CIO for 3 years, so I guess I ticked the box, right? I did a stint as a CIO, and I learned a lot. But if you have that kind of horizon in mind, that I'm just here to tick the box, then your thought processes and your behaviors are going to be very focused on short-term gains. What can I do? What did I accomplish? What things can I do in my 2.5 years that I have in this position?
That really depends on how many flip charts you have.
Oh, absolutely. And it's an inverse relationship. The more flip charts, the less years you get in the chair. It's just, 6 or 8 flip charts and you're out, right?
Yeah. So there's a couple of mindsets in that approach, right? Or a mindset to that approach. There's the I have to have all these things in place before I leave, so that I have the accomplishments to share for the step up to the better paying what.
Yeah.
And then the other one might be, I'm measured on this and this and this, and if I don't accomplish those 3 things, check the boxes, then I'm the one who ends up the loser in this game.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And so that really has some incredibly dangerous or downside side effects of that. And I think we're going to get to that. But when we talk about, driving for actual results that are beyond the short-term horizon, is I've really come to understand that there's a context in an organization in which you're trying to accomplish something. Every organization exists in a context. There's constraints, there's business expectations, there's cultural and geographic, all of those things that shape the nature of a company. And I think as a leader, as a CIO, if you will, or anybody that is responsible for the direction of the organization, is, do you really understand that context? Do you think that you understand that context? And I've seen this before. You bring in somebody from it's like a senior executive from the automotive industry comes in to help a consumer electronics company really, build quality products that are going to last. And there's a different context in automotive than there is consumer electronics. And I've seen people be successful at it, but the first thing we need to try to do is really understand what the context is in which we're driving change. And that even is in the micro. As a new CIO or as a CIO, is, do you understand the actual business challenges? You come in from the outside and you say, oh, I can increase efficiency and I can improve customer satisfaction at the service desk, and holy cow, we don't have knowledge management, and that can really make us a more powerful, customer experience friendly organization. But is that the challenges that your organization is facing? If in the context, are you solving the problems that your constituents in the organization need you to solve?
No.
Well, frequently that's the case, right?
Yes. Simple as that.
Yeah. So context involves so much. Like that could be a whole episode on of itself, because you're talking about culture, you're talking about organizational structure, you're talking about mission, vision, purpose, you're talking about all of these big things. One of the questions I ask when we are in a coaching situation with a leader, and we're talking about performance and KPIs and all of that, is, are you here for your ego, your agenda, or the cause? Or is it possible in the context in which you're working for you to be able to actually bring a balance to those three, and ensure that the cause isn't left out, or that you're not missing the things you're supposed to accomplish while you're trying to do these personal things? Or
Well,
right?
some people just come in to paint pretty colors because it looks good on the resume. And it's not just ticking the box for
That's the agenda,
the role,
right?
but there's an agenda that comes with it and says, well, if I can change just the way something looks, that it's a cover. It's just.
And we've seen this a lot. Is if you solve the real problems, the real issue that we're trying to deal with here, that's a big problem.
Mm-hmm.
I may or may not be able to get to that. I may or may not be able to get that in the amount of time I have. So I'm not going to try to do that. I'm going to put a veneer over the top of the actual root cause of the problem, the underlying problem. I mean, politicians do this all the time, right? If I can't accomplish it during my term and early enough so that I can say, hey, look at all the success that I've made for re-election, then I'm not going to deal with it. I mean, it's to some degree, it's predictable human behavior. But on the other hand, if we're talking about authentic leadership, and Patty, I wanted to ask you more. I mean, you spit that out pretty quick. Ego, mission, and cause. Is that the three that you had? Tell me more about those.
Agenda and cause.
Okay.
So we all have an ego. We all have our ego, right?
Yeah.
I mean, every single one of us. Nobody walks into the world egoless, but you do have to keep that in self-control. Then there is the agenda. So that's the person who says, I need to accomplish this for the next job, so I'm just going to do it because it looks great. That's the lip service or the lipstick. And then the cause really is the long-term understanding of what the organization is about and what you're trying to achieve in the world. And so if you can take a balance between ego, agenda, and cause, and be able to say, yes, I'm still allowed to work on my career, right? And yes, I have an ego. I need to at least be able to buffer and not feel like a failure through this.
Mm.
But it's that authenticity you talk about, Greg, that if you can be authentic in that, you have the opportunity to use those things for you. But if you just slide into one or the other, if you're there for the ego or you're there for the agenda, or you're only there for the cause, you actually won't achieve much in that role. You've got to balance the three out. It's almost like a three-legged chair.
So question, because the title X says don't just check that box. In other words, we still have to check some boxes.
Absolutely.
So I think, this is that balance that you're talking about, is that if I think about all the things that we try to accomplish, whether individually, as a team, as an organization, there are certain things we've got to go through and say, yeah, sure, I've got this. Even everyday examples. If I don't have it on the shopping list when I go to the supermarket, it doesn't get got, because
that's not just a guy thing.
No, it's not just a guy thing. But it's one of those things where I like to have the list, because
Let me address
I will
that.
prepare it. Yeah, I will prepare it beforehand. I will say, well, what am I thinking about, accomplishing this week? What is it that I want to do? And I will write out what I need for that particular week, etc. And then go check. Right, I have those things. So now let's go and play.
So I'm not suggesting that anybody write a book or whatnot, but the whole idea of ego, agenda, and cause, I envision this, Patty. And if you're working on this, I apologize because I'm not aware of it. But I could see some form of a notebook or a timekeeping activity that said, how much of my time am I spending on ego activities versus agenda activity versus cause activities, and attempting to try to put that into perspective. And I'll tell you from personal experience, I have a tendency to go for cause. I'm here because I truly believe in what, and everybody says that, of course. But in fact, when you kind of totally are sold out on believe on what it is that we're doing, I think you can, in some cases, kind of ignore or underplay the others. Here's one of those things that I think is for a leader, people have an instinctive sense of authenticity. I truly believe this. I believe that an audience watching a play, or a musician or an artist can look at the canvas and understand something about the authenticity. I truly believe that. And in corporate leaders, organizational leaders, a phoned in story about why we're doing this or why it's important. We need to reduce operational costs by 20% in the next 3 months. Yay, let's get behind that. And I was like, why? Why is that important? Help me to understand in the context of this corporation. People are pretty reasonable. So give them a reason, give them an opportunity to understand what the cause is that makes the agenda and our own egos, where it puts it into the proper perspective. I think that's really important if you want to lead organizations.
I'm going to ask you all a question. Tell me what Tesla is.
The company?
Tell me what it is, like the companies. What
wow. Catch us off guard. So I'm going to go with my gut. My gut instinct says that they are an irreverent innovator.
Anyone else want to throw your hat in the ring?
Well, I thought they were quite, technology-wise, very innovative, because they're wanting to make life better in some way.
Okay. Roy?
Yeah, I think it's a computer company that masquerades as an auto shop. Basically.
So they have literally taken what they do. So Tesla, yes, they make cars. Yes, they make solar panels. Yes, they do clean energy storage. But how they describe themselves to each other and to the universe is they're a clean energy company.
So I'm not sure that entirely explains the flamethrower.
Okay, maybe not the flamethrower, but there's some entertainment value there. However, my point being is that everything we do means that we're meeting this purpose or this mission in life.
Yeah.
And whatever we choose to build allows us the opportunity to be authentically reaching toward that end, right?
Yeah, and I think there's two pieces of that I think are important. Is if you look at your history, that can help you understand what's authentically you.
Yeah.
And if you look to the future, that can help you focus on those things that are the most authentic to you. Because again, I think that people have this instinctive sense of that's not you. That's not you being you. That's you play acting, checking boxes, doing something that you think is important. And to your point earlier, Patty and Simone, is there are certain things that you have to do within an organization, whether you like it or not, whether you believe it or not. Employee performance reviews, HR stuff, payroll, administration, having difficult conversation. Those are all things that you do in an organization that don't necessarily feed your cause, right?
I'll tell you who it is that understands authenticity better than anybody. And you'll be surprised when I tell you this, and then I'll illustrate it. Comedians understand authenticity better than anybody does. They know exactly where the line is. And a good comedian, hi, I'm Bob Smarmy, can cross that line just like that because they know exactly where the line is. So if you want to study about how to communicate with more authenticity, sit down with a comedian.
Absolutely.
They are more in tune to the, excuse the expression, BS meter of their audience
I agree with
most
that.
leaders would be able to achieve. Yeah.
So it's interesting. So there's, and I don't want to give a plug to any particular thing, but there's a series that interviews various comedians by another very famous comedian, and they go to a coffee shop and they talk. But it's fascinating how they talk about their craft. And it occurs to me that they deeply understand how people think and how they're feeling at any given moment of time. And they know that I want to move you over to here. And that's the authenticity of the storytelling. That's exactly right, Roy. And as corporate leaders, we have that same thing. It's like you need to have a sense that if you send a rah-rah email on Friday at 3:30 in the afternoon, then out there on the floor, don't necessarily push too hard on why I know this. Out there on the floor, it's like, oh, there goes the hurrah email, right? It comes across as inauthentic, which is why my personal preference was I walk the floor. I was like, hey.
I'll tell you what I believe those comedians have that many leaders don't. When something that I do believe authenticity is very strongly tied to is our competency around emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm. It's self-awareness. They have such a great grasp, Simone, of self-awareness, but they also have an incredible grasp of situational awareness.
And to read the room, to read the people that they're with.
One of you has to ask me the most important element in comedy.
Okay, Roy, what's the most
timing
element? Oh, well done.
Boom.
And unwittingly, Patty became the straight man.
I'm always the straight man. Great.
Yeah, I know. I think if you go back and look at vintage comedians, which I actually did recently, is some of the material is dated. Some of the cadence of the storytelling of old comedians, you can tell it's in black and white, and they dress funny and all that sort of stuff. But other than that, they're telling a story that connects with me. And it's fascinating that somebody who's telling a story from 1940s, who never heard of this internet or social media or globalization on the scale that we have now, is able to tell a story that's so humanly authentic that it connects with me today. That is emotional intelligence, I believe.
It's like, sometimes in the classroom or in the boardroom, when you're actually explaining something or telling a story from another incident that's similar to their situation now, people, and no matter how horrible it is or, how sarcastic the situation might end up being, or people will facepalm and all sorts of things. But the reason they laugh is because they know it's true.
Mm-hmm.
They feel it. They know that
Mhm.
they're like, yeah, I've experienced something similar, or yeah, I could see that happening with, Bob next door at so and so, things
You know,
like
it's
that.
it, and what's interesting in the quote that's still on the screen here is that what didn't get said is, can I see myself in that story, in your authentic story? Can I see myself? Do I have a place in your
Mhm.
story? And if I do, then both I buy into it, I understand it, and I feel that I have permission to be in that. And I think that's a powerful organizational leadership.
There's
Well, you're
another
in the
thing about,
KTLO story.
yes, you are the KTLO story. Heaven help you. Uh, Another thing that's almost universal about comedy is one of the keys to a joke is that it sets up an expectation and then completely cuts out.
Yeah.
So it's the equivalent of a leader saying, "We're doing great. We're being very successful." And this is what happened at Enron. Frankly, uh, we're doing great. We're successful. Stock price is going to go up. We're in better shape financially than we've ever been. Boom, bankrupt the next day, right? And comedians will set up the story so that they lead you in one particular direction and have you believing something is real and then come under it.
I think
And
we just
the other thing that they have that's really good is that there's a really dark psychology underneath that as well. There's this deep sarcasm. It's a little bit wrong and a little bit right, but I think the same thing with Leah when you're telling the story is being able to, walk that line, walk that edge, because there are so many things that we find that are boundaries to us in being able to provide the compelling reason sometimes. And there's that compelling reason where it's that balance between something's not really good and something's not quite bad, but there's something in there that we can work with and take a step out and move to the future.
I think that's absolutely relating to the people's human experience, right? Where it's that something we've all, yeah, so it gives meaning. I think what's interesting in our organizations right now is that we're seeing some shifts in expectation of the employees, and we're in many organizations still seeing the same model, not recognizing the shift. And giving meaning to the collective experience means it's really tough for me as an individual, and you have to work on it. And that's where we go to balancing ego, agenda, and cause, because when you go to give meaning for something, you have to understand the collective experiences within an organization so that you can understand how their experience is going to contribute to your plan forward. Right? So it's not just self-awareness and emotional intelligence, but social intelligence as well. It's really, truly bringing and giving meaning to with a compelling and authentic story to the purpose of the organization, I think.
Well, I mean, when you think about it, as leaders, we're trying to help people get somewhere. We're taking them on this journey and wanting to take them somewhere. That will often mean that we're somewhere where we don't want to be right now. So we've got to look at it from that context. If we're leading, why are we leading? Why can't we just, have a stasis on what's happening? But and just maintain that atmosphere and that environment, etc. But more often than not, we're actually trying to move on from something. Yeah. So that's why I like, coming back to that understanding about, I guess, what's termed as dark psychology is just the other side of the fact that we want to move forward. So when we use humor and when we use stories, what we're actually doing is enabling them to be in a safe thinking space. We can play with the ideas. We're able to, and I think, they can see themselves as being part players in that. They can see their own authenticity in saying, hey, yes, we can be a part of that movement forward. And they can have a little bit of fun with it. It's like, yeah, it's like when a baby falls over, that they look at you and wait, do I cry or do I laugh? Have you never noticed that? They
Yeah.
actually wait to see what your response
Your
is
response is going to be, yeah.
before they choose what they're going to do, because they're not sure how they should respond yet. So this is something really critical as a leader, is understanding that they're going to respond to your response.
I so agree with that. I mean, more than or beyond just babies is you have kids on the playground, a 6, 8, even 10-year-old, looks to mom and dad like, how am I supposed to respond to this skinned knee? Interestingly, when I was walking on a waterfront in New Zealand, their kids were much more free rangey than we see here in the States all that much. And I watched a kid who was on a scooter, was on a cobblestone, and it just seemed profoundly dangerous. And there wasn't a big fence or wall between, falling, 20 feet into the ocean. Well, this kid fell and skinned his knee. And mom's response was simply like, yeah, real matter of fact. And he just went on. And I thought that's really interesting how we are teaching each other how to respond in circumstances. And I think in
and that
corporations,
doesn't change. That
I was
doesn't
going to say,
change as we go older.
I think in corporate circumstances, we have the same thing. And it's like, hey, we're having a downturn. There's going to be layoffs and there's going to be, cost reductions. I have the opportunity to some degree to kind of set the tone of how I feel about this.
Yeah.
I heard this story once upon a time that was kind of great. The manager, I didn't personally witness this, but a credible person I know did. Calls everybody into a big meeting, a couple hundred people, and he goes, I've got some bad news. I've been laid off. And everybody was empathetic and very sympathetic to him. I was like, wow, that's terrible. And then once you all started feeling sympathetic for him, and he goes, and so are all of you. And it was kind of a disingenuous way to tell his story, but he projected very quickly, and people responded to the energy that he gave, which is, we're empathetic. Like, wow, that really stinks. And I think that's a bad example. Please don't misquote me as saying that that's a good example. But I think
what you actually got, there's another little story. So when I had people first coming in, and you do the orientation, the onboarding with them, but that first sort of welcome to your first day and let's sit down and have a talk with this. Well, what's interesting, even prior to that, if this person's going to sign the letter of offer, so even before their first day, I've already talked to them about their responsibilities and our responsibilities when you choose to leave. Notice I said that, not if you choose to leave. When you choose to leave, this is the expectation that we need X amount of time as well, the professional handover that's needed in order to support your responsibilities towards the organization and for us towards you when you decide that you want to move on to another career or to another position within the organization. So I've already preempted or had the conversation prior to. So I think when it comes time to, if there is layoffs and things like that, that there's a culture already set, or there's a mindset already there in terms of acceptance or acknowledgement that, okay, we've got some stuff to deal with. So, yeah.
So going back to the mention of lip service before, you point up one area that I'm often concerned about, which is if there are going to be reductions. A lot of organizations always say, it's part of their repetitive messaging, our people are our most important asset, right? In very few cases is that true. It may be true in the actual sense of the business, but usually in terms of the actions and stance of the leaders of that organization, it isn't true. Very few cases have organizations sold off their real estate before they laid people off. They will do away with personal development. They'll do away with positions. They'll do away with everything before they start, divesting physical assets.
So I would posit that saying our people are our most important asset is a cop-out to actually setting up a proper mission goals.
Exactly. And that's why I think those approaches that we have are so important, so that, they feel that you've understood the relationship has been set at the very beginning. There was one time, and I think it's probably, and we all know firing someone is not the most pleasant job in the world. And the number of murders and acquisitions I've been a part of is really quite horrendous, actually. But in this case, it was just somebody that had been onboarded, but, 6 to 8 weeks in, you could really know there was a mismatch between this person and the role. And the person was feeling it too, and they were struggling. They were really struggling to get through the training, etc. So had the conversation with them. Then we tried other approaches, other ways, and said, is this something you really want to give a go? And we did, and that didn't quite work out. And then we finally had to, let the person go. Anyway, so the usual, we have to get security, and I walked down to the garage with her. Next thing you know, and she's crying, of course, because it feels really bad when that happens. And then she gave me a hug and thanked me for being such a cool manager about how we went through it. And I've gone, that's amazing. That to me was like, you're thanking me for firing you?
Well, that's somebody who has withstood some very unpleasant experiences.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
They're thanking you.
And authenticity make a difference. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's why, Roy, the quote that I was looking at previous about, understanding the topography of where you've come into, it's really important that you ask your people about their stories and collect all the stories around you. You want to collect the story, not just of the organization, because that's important for the context of what you need to achieve, as part of your role, but the people beside you, the people above you, the people below you, and the people that you interact with, even externally with the organization. Those stories build a picture. Those experiences make an impact. And so before you go about thinking about changing anything, know the stories, understand the topography in which you've come to play, and how your story fits in with that.
I think you've described the difference between a dependent and interdependent organization, right? So when you've got this solar system of interdependence and understanding, you actually recognize the stories around you. When you're a dependent top-down organization, it's, my way or the highway, and it's really hard to build relevance and context in a culture that's safe.
Yeah.
Or a codependent organization.
So I joined an organization once as the enterprise support services manager, and the building. I'll tell the story real briefly because it gets to the relevant conundrum. It was kind of kidney shaped. There was the level 1, level 2 support on one side, and then you had to go through a lobby with glass doors and all cool stuff over to the other side where the engineering team was. Right, classic. Right. And so the first week I was there, me being me, I walk over to the other side and just start talking to people. And I had one person who said, "Why are you over here?" And I said, "I'm new. I just want to, get to know what's going on. You belong over there." And that day was born every morning. I'd go get my coffee and then go around the other side and meet people. And some of those people, that was years ago, still text me today and I'm good friends with, because I dared to breach protocol and the strong social structure that was in that organization. And I listened to their stories. Why is that important to you? Why, what is your role within the organization? And really fundamentally changed how we did support. And it was very fundamental.
I like how when that happens, that really the easiest thing is to say, okay, I'm new, so can you explain to me why it is this way?
Yeah, explain to me why it is that you would be that rude to a new person who's going to most impact how your customers perceive you.
And that's when they tell you the story of how every Thanksgiving they cut the end off the ham. And
That's exactly right, Roy. So the quote that's on here is a loose paraphrase of something that I said. Is I think that as leaders in an organization, and I don't know if lack intellectual honesty is the right phrase, but we struggle with intellectual honesty. It's like, am I literally on board with what's happening here, or is this, as I called it at the time, a transaction? I'm leveraging the experience. I'm checking the box, or it's a pathway to my next thing here. But the thing that I focus on in this, the thing that I think is the most important, is what I'm calling intellectual honesty, because I think we're in some cases not honest with ourselves about what our intentions are, or why we're doing what we're doing. Because I quoted myself once upon a time, we're always the hero in our own story, right? When you tell your stories, very rarely are you the guy that was sadly mistaken, or made a blunder, or if you did, in the end you're the hero because you learned and grew and whatever, right? And so it's hard for us to be intellectually honest, to look in the mirror and look at us as others see us and say, I think my actions are contributing to what's happening here. And I think that I need to be more honest with, I am working on my ego or my agenda here a little bit, as I'm accomplishing the mission that I actually believe in. I think that's
there's
really
two
important.
things that I see when I look at that. The first thing is, intellectual and honesty. All of a sudden, I can see the nervous system having a problem with trying to marry those two things up. One is the thinking brain, the other's the emotional brain, and
Exactly.
that's part of our difficulty. Is the filter between those two doesn't always operate very well.
Does it count if I only think I'm emotional?
I think so.
Only if you can write a PhD thesis to prove it.
So there was,
but I think the other part of that is if I think about intellectual honesty in whether you're on board with a mission or not, sometimes, and it comes back to having to check the box occasionally, sometimes, your responsibility is to carry out the plan, say, for example, a merger and acquisition, when we're going through and, you do the matching up and you can see whether there's duplicates and this thing, it's your responsibility to make the choice of what stays and what goes. So whether you agree with the decision or not to have the merger or the restructuring, because it's the same thing that applies even if it's just an organization restructuring, that you still have a responsibility to make those things happen, because that wasn't your decision. That was a stakeholder decision or a business decision. But at the same time, our honesty comes to the fact in doing it the right way.
Yeah.
That's my big thing.
So mission jumped out at me. And I just want to jump into AW360 did a survey, and only a third of CEOs believe purpose is the CEO responsibility. They often delegate that to sales and marketing in most cases, or they expect it from the board. And I think one of the things that when we're working with senior executives, that most people think the mission is the purpose. So I want to go through just a few of those for you, so that because once you have clarity on what they are, then it turns you back into being responsible for doing what you're just talking about. So purpose. So purpose is actually what we're doing for someone else. Our purpose in the world, it's what we're doing for someone else. Mission is what we want to be, right? Values are our desired culture, and principles is just how we set the direction. So when we do facilitate those, we're very clear on the difference for them. Mission, values, and principles, when you're defining them, are about the organization, but purpose is about out there. It's about the world. And when you can't define your purpose, it's really hard to perform your mission.
Absolutely.
Right? So yeah.
So in that situation, I believed that my purpose was to make it as, and this is going to sound really terrible because of the way it was, as bloodless as possible.
Well, so
that happens. So
I have an example that was early in my management career. So I'll tell the story in brief. There was a merger, and there was a resulting layoff of staff associated with that. There eventually was. The big manager came around to every site. I was one of them, and we interviewed the staff. And as a result of the quick interview, there was a, are they in, or are they out? And out meant, you go on this whole, path to see if you can find another job, right? So at the end of the day, he said, all right, so do you want to talk to them or do you want me to? And I said, my staff, my message, I will talk to them. And I talked to 23 people and said, this is what's going to happen. Years later, that same manager said, hey, Sanker, did you know that of every site that I did that, all throughout North America, you were the only manager that did it yourself. The rest of them made me do it. And I think that gets to the heart of what you guys were talking about, is that was a decision that the organization made. It wasn't a democracy. Yes. I didn't get a vote. However, right. My purpose, my values say that I will do what I need to do for my own people. I have a responsibility.
You do exactly what you can to make sure that that person can continue, is okay, has been given the right resources, whatever that might be, because each person was very different. So, making sure that we attended to that. And the difficulty I find here, and I think this is a lesson for many organizations, especially when kind of HR disappeared into a more administrative thing, and now coming, well, hopefully in some organizations.
Don't get me started on that.
I know. But more from a point that a lot of, I guess, managers are not taught how to go about doing that. We're not taught about having the bad conversations. We're not taught about having the difficult things. And that's why I'm such a big stickler about making sure that people go through and are taught and practice emotional intelligence. A lot of people, it's not just a skill, it's a competency. This is something that will help yourself as a leader, as well as help your people.
So I might take exception to something you said. They're not taught. And you and I can debate offline. We won't do that in live on our broadcast, right? But I think people aren't taught that. I think that they need permission to be themselves. And I think that has largely to do with me. I was such a new manager when I did that I was operating on my instinction. Instinction? Wow, that's a good word. Wow. Put that in the dictionary. My internal values, who I was. Yeah. I just did what I thought was the right thing to do. And I didn't say, well, what does HR say, or what's the corporate line on this? Or
I think training is actually, it is part of that, because you're right, it's part of the culture. And that's what I mean, is that we don't often have that permission. And when, I think there's been a lot of changes show up in the last few months as well around that kind of stuff, where it's like, why do I have to even wear a suit anymore? It's, it doesn't, does the suit
I have to wear
change
pants?
My intellectual capacity?
Are you wearing pants?
Don't stand up, Greg.
Part of your training, though, is also experiential, right? And
yes,
absolutely.
It's both. It's the combination.
It's true that the longer you're in a leadership position, the better you get at handling conflict and difficult conversations. In fact, they say that if you're in a position for 10 or more years of leadership, you actually have acquired more of that. But those who are only a few years in struggle because that isn't part of the dynamic within the culture. And like you said,
a lot of them do.
You're bringing your personal values and beliefs and behaviors into play when you're dealing with it as the right thing to do. And that's where am I in the cause for this, right?
See, Greg, you were always brassy and bold, if you remember our episode on bold. See, so you had the gumption and you had that to jump that fence. But a lot of people don't. And so that's why we want to give them that competency and give them that confidence to actually go and get those skills.
I like the way that you said part of that training is connecting with your inner values. I forget exactly how you said, but that's what I heard. And I agree with that. That I strongly agree. I also agree, Patty, that the longer you're in a position, and that's why seat time as a manager or as a leader is important, because if you've been there 10 years, you've faced some things. You've probably fired some people. You've dealt with difficult, performance issues and those kind of things. So we do that. I was in an extended HR training once upon a time, and I needed to at various times go out in the hallway so that I could laugh inside of my head, because what I was being taught was not what I had seen for 10 years in that organization.
Ah,
Nothing they were describing was the actual behavior. And
they were checking the boxes.
And I pulled yes, they were. And I pulled the trainer aside because she was external and very qualified, high level of education, multiple books that she's published. And I said, I'm struggling here because of this. And she said, that is why we're doing it. That is why we're changing this. And we want to be investing in the up and coming leaders to compensate for the things that we're seeing right now that we don't want. And I said, I'm all in.
So the beauty of that statement alone is, if she's also saying you need to take personal responsibility for your pocket of happiness within your organization, right? So you need to bring that forward as a leader, and here's some material that can help you with that. So that personal responsibility is huge in being able to say, you know what, I'm going to own this for at least my team.
So did you and her conspire behind scenes? Because that's exactly what she said, Patty.
No, don't know who you're talking about.
Great minds think alike.
I can introduce, but she was exactly right. And that was the same session where we focused extensively on emotional intelligence, which is something that I went to work on. Because it's one of those areas where, as much as we think we are, you're not yet. It's something that you need to continue to be investing in. And
that's a lifelong learning.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something that...
well, that's why I don't really want to call it a skill. That's why I prefer to call it a competency. Because it's something that doesn't stop. It's something that we continue to store as we experience another person, or even the same person in a different circumstance. We know it's very different being recorded as to what might happen behind the scenes.
Simone, be good. You see that thing up there blinking? It says recording. Stop doing that.
Yeah.
If I can't be good, I'll be careful.
So I was going to say that one of the things that I discovered, and of course it's cliche, but we all discover these things for ourselves, is that you're talking about permission, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the adage is it's much easier to beg forgiveness than ask permission. And boy, is that ever true in a lot of organizations. And the larger they get, the more true it is. And I was always a ask forgiveness guy. That's what we're doing. That makes sense. That's where we're going. And then, bonk, hitting the magic brick wall and saying, oh, sorry, I'll go that way. And that was the way I navigated through several aspects of my career, was just running straight forward and smack into the brick wall. And next thing you know.
So that's important to, when you look at, there are two sets of values in play there, right? So there's the organizational and cultural values, and then there's your own personal values. Oh, look, there you go. So roadblocks and opportunities, brick wall.
Oh, look, it's a Pink Floyd moment.
Yeah, so I was going to say.
There's some personal stuff that we have to really focus on, and that is, where do I fit? Do my personal values, can I create that pocket of happiness, or is that not possible here because my values are conflicting with the organization? Now, sometimes if you wait too long, the organization will decide that for you.
I just want to know something, Patty. Is the pocket of happiness going to bubble up into a thing?
It might bubble up into a thing.
We're going to popularize these little phrases you come up with.
That's the thing, though. So bubble up into a thing. When you talk about creating a pocket of happiness, all of a sudden, if you start performing well because you've done well with your team, the rest of the organization starts to look and say, well, what are they doing? And sometimes they're insightful enough to ask. And you occasionally have this wonderful opportunity to be able to work that out into the organization by sharing and collaborating. And that's when we talk about system interconnectedness, right? It's the system as a whole. Do I have an opportunity or the ability to impact that? Now, when the roadblocks are really big, like there's 3 choices you can make when things are getting pretty tense. And Greg, you and I chatted about this for a few minutes, and that
I love this. I want you to get to this.
And that is, you can either find a way, create a way, or go away, right? You can make a choice. The problem is that you don't just drop it there. You've got to create a plan. don't just end it if you can, and in any way possible, create a plan to take what you've done there and move it to a different organization.
I totally resonate with that, and I feel like anybody who moves into a C-level position needs to talk to Patty and kind of get your brain shaped around the idea of, am I in the process of finding a way, exploring within the organization to try to understand where I fit, where I can make that contribution? Am I trying to literally create enough change that gives me the opportunity to make the contribution or make the achievement that I want to? Or am I in a position where I've become frustrated, I've hit the brick wall, thanks Roy, or it's dawned on me that this organization is not in a position where what I can do or what they want to do is going to happen. And so I need to start talking about what else do I need to do?
So this is the handshake, Greg. This is the handshake with ego, agenda, and cause. So you asked earlier, do I actually, oh, hello. Do I actually,
yeah, that's not right,
track where I am in the balance of that? And we really encourage our clients to keep a daily journal. And in that journal, it's asking ego, agenda, cause. And we actually do have a checklist. So that you mentioned that and said, I don't know if you do this, it actually is something that we do.
Okay, so that literally, I was not doing a paid endorsement or whatever. I just literally thought that's a brilliant idea, and therefore it is a brilliant idea, Patty. But I think at any level of leadership, there's not anything mythical that happens. There it is, Roy. There's not anything
still
mythical.
Not right. Whatever.
There's nothing mythical that happens at the C level in terms of skills and that sort of stuff. So everything we're talking about, somebody who's a database architect can be focusing on these very principles, right? Absolutely. It doesn't matter what your role within the organization, because we're all leaders to some degree. We're all have the opportunity to drive positive change within our organization. So it applies to everyone. But I will say that and this was part of my learning for the time that I was in a CIO spot, is that there is a different altitude of view within the organization that happens at the C-suite, and the level of accountability and responsibility that you have is as astronomically different than one layer below. That one inch.
Here's a little clue then. Next time anyone goes to, when you're in an interview, next time you're a candidate and you're going for a role, and they say, you want to get to the salary question, and they say, well, how much were you expecting, or what were you getting paid in the last job? When they say, were you getting paid in the last job? I say, well, that's irrelevant, because that was that role in that organization. That was completely different to, what we're talking about now. I say, well, how much are you actually expecting? And my response usually is, how hard does my butt get kicked when things go wrong?
So,
because that usually gives me
wow, that's a whole new episode.
I'm going to go back to my recording studio experience here with my friend and wonderful recording engineer David Blake, who I just happened to be coming in for a session, and the session prior was leaving, and the person asked David, how much do we owe you? And David's wonderful New Jersey response was, how much you got? So that's it. What salary were you expecting? How much you got?
How much you got? I think that, like I mentioned Tesla earlier, where they talk about their purpose in the world. Patagonia has a purpose in the world as well, and they're a really great company. I'm not trying to endorse companies, but I'm trying to example behavior, and it takes great risk at the C-suite, huge risk, to work to purpose. There is much greater risk when you actually are brave enough to put a purpose out there and then live to it.
Do you know what? There's such a joy when you're becoming your purpose.
There is, but there's also a dollar value attached. So when you think about
Well,
it,
that could be part of the joy.
every time Patagonia makes a decision based on their purpose, as opposed to where they think, intellectually the spreadsheets say they should go, they take a risk. And when they take that risk, they typically increase sales by 27 to 30%. And I think that's the link here that's really important to understand, that if you are in a C-suite position, your responsibility is not to play the safe card, but to work to purpose.
I agree with that.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
cool. So,
so-
I just want to do this just once and let you see that, in fact, when Roy tries hard enough, Roy can get it right. Find a way, create a way, or go away.
And don't just check
Is there
that
a
box.
Soon enough, we'll be doing the third bullet, but
So Patty, you said something when you originally talked to, bring it back up, Roy. It's like, now that you spent all that time making it right, Patty, you said something about, in the go away thing, you said something about finding somewhere else to live your purpose. I forget your exact words. I'd have to go back and look at the recording, but you talked about that. And I really like that because it connects back to your purpose is about you. That's you, your values, your desire, your, ethics, whatever those things are. And so it's not a matter of you're a bad person, go away. It's a matter of I'm a person who has a purpose, and I need to be in an organization that either appreciates, desires, or hopefully celebrates my purpose as a part of achieving what their mission is.
Greg Sanker, the lightning man, strikes again.
the lightning man. Well, it's another week. Another week.
I think that was a nice way to end it, Greg.
And so here we are once again as we KTLO
Keeping the learning
keeping
on.
the learning on. Whatever. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you in episode 16.
Sweet 16.
I know. See you next time.
We all still like each other.